And we're live from the living room as Doug eyes up the matchday spread. He's reaching for the buffalo wing. Perfect! Hang on, what's this? Oh, he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! Incredible! What a finish! Sensational combination! Look at the delight on his face. There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a pack of Pepsi Zero Sugar for today's match. It's poetry in motion.
This is going to be an extremely busy month. I have to watch 104 soccer games, follow the pregame, the postgame, yell useless opinions at the TV. It's a lot. So I knew that when it comes to screening for colon cancer, the choice was clear. The Cologuard Plus test. It can be used at home and can only take 15 minutes, so I can do it during halftime and not miss any action. If you are 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a prescription at Cologuard.com.
What if I told you there was a house where 4 members of the same family had ended their own lives? Or generations of unimaginable wealth turned into unimaginable tragedy? And where visitors today still report hearing whispers in empty hallways, phantom footsteps climbing impossible staircases, and shadow figures watching from rooms no one has entered for decades. Tonight, we're traveling to the heart of St. Louis, Missouri to one of the most famous haunted homes in America, the Lemp Mansion. But this isn't just another ghost story. Were the Lemps simply victims of terrible circumstances, or did something inside this grand Victorian mansion feed on generations of heartbreak? Turn down the lights, settle in, and let's step inside one of the darkest chapters in American history. This is Haunted America. Before we unlock the doors to the Lemp Mansion, we have a quick favor to ask. If you're enjoying Haunted America, make sure to follow us over on Facebook. That's where you'll find behind-the-scenes photos, episode updates, historical images from places we cover, bonus paranormal content, and previews of what's coming next. Now, admittedly, I am really bad at social media. It's something I have to get the hang of, but I'm trying to build that page up a little bit. It's also one of the easiest ways to stay connected with the show between episodes. And also, if you listened to the last episode, we are incredibly excited to announce our biggest project yet, 50 States of Fear. This upcoming series will take us across all 50 states in search of the most haunted places, forgotten legends, cursed locations, eerie history, and unexplained mysteries America has to offer. Some episodes will explore famous locations you've heard about. Others will uncover places that rarely get the spotlight. But we need your help. If there's a haunted location in your hometown, an abandoned asylum, a forgotten cemetery, an old hotel, haunted bridge, or any place you think deserves to be featured in 50 States of Fear, send us an email at hauntedamericapodcast@gmail.com. That's hauntedamericapodcast@gmail.com. And if you've experienced something you still can't explain, a ghost encounter, a strange night in an old house, an unexplained voice, or a terrifying experience while exploring somewhere haunted, we'd love to hear your story. With your permission, your experience could be featured in a future episode. Now, let's head to Missouri. Long before stories of ghosts echoed through its hallways, the Lemp Mansion stood as a symbol of extraordinary success. Perched on a hill overlooking St. Louis, the massive home reflected everything the Lemp family had achieved. It wasn't simply a mansion, it was a statement. During the late 19th century, the Lemps ranked among the wealthiest families in the United States. Their fortune rivaled many of the industrial giants of the era. And at the center of that fortune was one thing: beer. To understand why the mansion became surrounded by so much tragedy, we first have to understand the family who built it. Their story begins decades before the mansion itself. The Lemp story starts with a German immigrant named Johann Adam Lemp. He arrived in St. Louis in the 1830s, joining thousands of immigrants who were helping transform the growing river city into one of America's commercial powerhouses. Like many Germans settling in Missouri, he brought with him a passion for brewing. At first, he produced small batches of beer, selling them locally. What separated him from many of his competitors wasn't simply the quality of his beer, it was geography. Near his brewing sat a natural limestone cave. Now, this is before refrigeration existed, so maintaining cold temperatures throughout the year was one of brewing's greatest challenges. Those underground caves stayed cool year-round, creating the perfect environment for storing lager beer. The cave became one of his greatest advantages. As demand increased, so did production, and by the mid-1800s, the family brewery had become one of the most successful operations west of the Mississippi River. After his death in 1862, leadership had passed on to his son, William J. Lemp. Now, if he had built the foundation, William transformed it into an empire. The timing couldn't have been better. America was changing rapidly. Railroads connected cities like never before, and industrial manufacturing exploded. Urban populations grew, and beer consumption soared. William aggressively expanded production. The brewery became known for its lager, a style that was growing increasingly popular across America thanks in large part to German immigrants introducing it to the country. By the 1870s and 1880s, the Lemp Brewery ranked among the largest breweries in the United States. Millions of barrels of beer left St. Louis every year. The family owned not only breweries, but bottling operations, warehouses, rail connections, ice plants, real estate, and eventually a sprawling underground network of caves beneath parts of the properties. The family's wealth had become almost unimaginable. In the early 1860s, William Lemp purchased an elegant home in what was then one of St. Louis's most prestigious neighborhoods. Over time, the residence underwent major expansions. Rather than building an entirely new mansion elsewhere, William chose to enlarge and renovate the existing structure again and again. Each addition reflected the family's growing fortune. The final result was an enormous 33-room mansion filled with ornate woodwork, grand staircases, imported furnishings, stained glass, marble fireplaces, and luxurious entertaining spaces. It became one of the finest homes in Missouri. The mansion overlooked the brewery, allowing William to keep a constant eye on the business that made his family famous. Employees reportedly joked that Mr. Lemp could almost supervise the brewery from his windows. Everything suggested the family had achieved the American dream: money, influence, respect, and power. But behind the lavish parties and expensive decor, cracks had already begun forming. Running one of the largest breweries in America was exhausting. William Lemp became known as an intensely private man. Friends described him as disciplined, demanding, reserved. He expected perfection from himself and everyone around him. His children grew up surrounded by unimaginable privilege. Yet privilege, as most of us know, doesn't guarantee happiness. The pressures placed upon wealthy families during the Gilded Age were immense. Every son carried expectations, and every daughter represented the family's reputation. Every business decision affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. Failure wasn't simply disappointing, it was unacceptable. Among William's children, one son seemed destined to inherit everything: Frederick. By nearly every account, Frederick possessed the intelligence, business sense, and personality needed to lead the brewery into the future. He was deeply involved in company operations. Employees respected him, Family members viewed him as William's natural successor. For years, it seemed inevitable that Frederick would someday become the face of the Lemp Empire. Then, tragedy struck. In 1901, Frederick died unexpectedly at the age of 28. Historical records indicate he died from complications related to health problems that had developed after an illness. Contemporary accounts describe his death as the result of heart failure associated with those complications. Regardless of the exact medical cause, the loss devastated the family. For William, it was more than just losing a son. He had lost the future of everything he had built. People close to him noticed immediate changes. The once driven businessman became withdrawn. Friends say he stopped showing interest in many of the things that had once consumed his life. He reportedly spent long periods isolated inside the mansion. Employees noticed his absence from daily operations. The grief was simply overwhelming. And some historians believe William never truly recovered. The mansion itself changed as well. The laughter of family gatherings gave way to quiet halls. Rooms once filled with celebration became places of mourning. Servants later recalled that an almost oppressive sadness settled over the home after Frederick's death. Whether that atmosphere was supernatural or simply the weight of unimaginable grief depends on who you ask. As the new century began, another threat emerged. Across America, the temperance movement gained momentum. Organizations argued alcohol was responsible for crime, poverty, domestic violence, and social decline. Politicians increasingly supported restrictions on alcohol sales. For brewing families like the Lemps, these developments represented an existential threat. The business that had created their fortune suddenly faced an uncertain future. William found himself mourning his son while simultaneously you know what? I'm just going to skip over it. You guys know what I mean. Worrying about an industry under attack. Stress mounted from every direction. No one could have imagined how much darker things were about to become. Because inside the mansion, one final tragedy was approaching. A tragedy that would forever change the house's reputation. One gunshot, one locked bedroom, and the beginning of one of America's most enduring haunted legends. By the early 1900s, the Lemp family name still carried weight in St. Louis, but behind the walls of their mansion, something had already broken. The death of Frederick Lemp in 1901 had shattered William J. Lemp Sr. in ways people never fully understood. The brewery empire still functioned, the money was still flowing, and the public image of success remained intact. But inside the family home, things were different. Servants later described William as withdrawn and distant. He spent long hours alone in the mansion, reportedly avoiding rooms that once belonged to his son. Business decisions became harder for him to make, and his presence at the brewery became less frequent. The house that once symbolized success was beginning to feel like a place weighed down by grief. And in 1904, that tragedy deepened. On February 1st, 1904, William J. Lemp was found dead inside the mansion. Historical records and newspaper reports from the time state that he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. There was no public funeral held at the mansion itself. The event was kept relatively quiet compared to the family's social standing, a reflection of both the stigma of suicide at the time and the family's desire for privacy. Now, for St. Louis, the news was shocking, but for those who knew the family, it was not entirely unexpected. A man who had built one of the largest brewing empires in America had now died inside the very home that he had expanded during his rise to power. The mansion, once filled with life, was now associated with death for the second time in just a few years, and it would not be the last. After William Sr.'s death, control of the Lemp Brewery passed to his son, William J. Billy Lemp Jr. Billy inherited not only the business, but the weight of a collapsing industry. At the time, the brewing world in America was already under pressure. The temperance movement had gained significant political influence, and Prohibition sentiment was spreading rapidly across the country. Billy attempted to modernize the business and keep it competitive. The Lemp Brewery still had a strong distribution networks and a loyal customer base. But the cultural tide was turning against alcohol itself. What had once made the family rich was now becoming politically controversial. And inside the family, instability continued. While Billy tried to hold the brewery together, other members of the Lemp family were struggling with their own personal demons. The mansion, still standing on its hill above St. Louis, remained the family home, but it no longer felt like a place of celebration. Instead, it became associated with absence. Rooms that once belonged to Frederick remained largely untouched. Portraits of family members lined the walls, but visitors later described the feeling that the home itself had become quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Even as the business continued, the emotional center of the family had collapsed, and more tragedy was still ahead. In 1920, another devastating loss struck the family. Elsa Lemp, one of William's daughters, died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Unlike Frederick and William Sr., Elsa's death occurred during a period when the family was already under immense pressure from Prohibition-era changes and internal strain. Her death added another layer of sorrow to an already devastated family history. 3 members of the family had now died by suicide within the same household lineage in less than 2 decades. The mansion's reputation began to shift in public perception. What had once been seen as a symbol of wealth and success was increasingly discussed in darker terms, often associated with tragedy rather than achievement. By the time national prohibition was fully implemented in 1920 through the 18th Amendment, the Lemp Brewery was already in decline. The federal ban on alcohol production was devastating for breweries across the country, but for the Lemp family, it was catastrophic. Unlike some competitors who managed to pivot into alternative products, the Lemp Brewery struggled to adapt effectively. The company's vast infrastructure, once a strength, became a financial burden. Warehouses emptied, equipment shut down, employees were laid off, and the business that had once made the Lemps one of the wealthiest families in America had come to an end. As the brewery collapsed, the mansion itself began to change. Family members slowly moved out. Rooms that had once been filled with generations of life became vacant. The mansion, once the crown jewel of the Lemp legacy, became quieter year after year. Eventually, it was no longer a family home at all. It was simply a reminder of what had been lost. And in the years that followed, the stories began. Stories from neighbors, caretakers, stories from people who claimed that even though the family was gone, something inside the mansion had stayed behind. Footsteps in empty hallways, lights flickering in abandoned rooms, and the feeling, always the feeling, that someone was still watching from within the walls. But the most chilling chapter of the Lemp story was still to come, because not every member of the family had yet met their end. Alright guys, we'll get right back into the episode in a second, but first, I have to shout out tonight's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by one of the best sports card shops in Louisiana, AJ Sports Cards in Baton Rouge. If you're a collector, a sports fan, or someone chasing that next massive pull, you need to check out AJ's. AJ Sports Cards has an incredible collection of sealed sports card boxes from all of your favorite leagues. NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. Whether you're hunting rookie cards, autographs, rare parallels, or that one grail card for your collection, AJ's has the products collectors are looking for. And for all the Pokemon fans out there, they've got you covered too. AJ's carries sealed Pokemon products, booster boxes, ETBs, packs, and collectibles that are perfect for both serious collectors and casual fans looking for the thrill of opening something rare. Not into ripping packs? No problem. AJ Sports Card also has a huge selection of singles, so you can track down that exact card without relying on luck. From vintage legends to modern superstars, there's always something incredible waiting in the shop. The best part? AJ's isn't just a store, it's a community. Whether you've been collecting for years or you're just getting started, you'll find a welcoming atmosphere filled with people who love the hobby just as much as you do. So if you're anywhere near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, make sure to stop by AJ Sports Cards and see what everybody's talking about. Rip some packs, find your next favorite card, and experience one of Louisiana's top spots for sports cards and Pokemon collectibles. Tell them Haunted America sent you. Now, turn the lights down low, because it's time to get back to the shadows and stories of Haunted America. By the 1920s, the Lemp name no longer carried the same power it once had. The brewery was gone, the fortune was gone, and one by one, the family members who had once filled the mansion with life had either passed away or moved out. But the Lemp Mansion itself still stood on the hill in St. Louis, and within its walls, another tragedy was about to unfold. Among William J. Lemp Sr.'s children was another son, Charles Lemp. Unlike his brother Billy, Charles never fully embraced the family business. After the brewery's decline and the death of his father, Charles distanced himself from much of the Lemp legacy. He lived a quieter, more isolated life, and over time, he became increasingly withdrawn from society. By the early 1920s, Charles was living in or around St. Louis, though not fully connected to the public life his family had once dominated. But in 1922, tragedy struck the Lemp name again. In May of 1922, Charles Lemp was found dead in the Lemp Mansion. Historical accounts report that his death was, you probably guessed it, another self-inflicted gunshot wound. Unlike earlier family deaths, Charles' passing carried an added layer of mystery because of what followed. After his death, rumors began circulating almost immediately, some claiming the strange behavior had been observed in the house in the days leading up to it, others suggesting that Charles had been living an increasingly isolation type of life inside the mansion itself. There were also questions that never fully found answers in public record, which only fueled speculation over the decades. With Charles' death, 4 members of the Lemp family had now died by suicide within the same broader family history. The Lemp Mansion's name would never fully recover. After all these tragedies and the collapse of the family fortune, the mansion changed hands and purposes. By the mid-20th century, the once grand home was no longer a private residence of one of America's wealthiest families. It became a boarding house, and later it operated as a restaurant and inn, where where there had once been private family gatherings, there were now public dinners and overnight guests. And with that transition came something unexpected. Reports of strange occurrences began to increase. Long before paranormal television and modern ghost hunting equipment, people staying or working inside the mansion began reporting unusual experiences. Some of the earliest recurring claims included the sound of footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing without explanation, sudden drops in temperature in specific rooms, the sensation of being watched when alone, and voices heard in rooms that were confirmed to be empty. Staff members reportedly began to avoid certain areas of the house, especially upper floors and isolated rooms that felt unusually heavy or uncomfortable. Over time, these stories began to cluster around specific areas of the mansion, and one legend in particular began to grow. One of the most famous and most debated stories connected to the Lemp Mansion is the legend of the so-called monkey face boy. According to local folklore, a child with a facial deformity was hidden away in the mansion and kept out of public view. The story claims the child lived in isolation inside the house, and after his death, his presence never truly left. Visitors have reported seeing what they describe as a shadowy, childlike figure or hearing faint laughter in upper rooms. However, it is important to note there is no verified historical record confirming that such a child existed within the Lemp family. Most historians and researchers classify the monkey-faced boy story as folklore that developed over time as the mansion's haunted reputation grew. Still, like many legends tied to historic haunted locations, it persists because of repeated storytelling and unexplained personal experiences. As the decades passed, the Lemp Mansion became widely known not just for its history, but for its atmosphere. By the late 20th century, it was no longer just a historical site. It had become one of the most famous haunted locations in the Midwest. Visitors and staff continued reporting shadow figures near staircases, the feeling of unseen presence in dining rooms, objects moving slightly without explanation, whispering voices late at night, and sudden emotional shifts in certain rooms, especially those tied to Lemp family deaths. Whether these experiences were psychological, environmental, or something else entirely depends on who you ask. But the consistency of the reports has kept the legend alive, and as paranormal investigators eventually began visiting the mansion, the stories only multiplied. Today, the Lemp Mansion stands as both a restaurant and historic site. It is carefully maintained, preserved, and open to the public, but its history remains impossible to separate from its reputation. A family that once symbolized American industrial success is now remembered largely for its tragedies. And a home that once represented wealth and achievement is now one of the most famous haunted locations in the United States. But the question remains, is the Lemp Mansion truly haunted? Or is it a place where history, grief, and storytelling have layered so heavily over time that the past itself feels alive? Either way, the story isn't finished yet, because those who visit today still report that something inside those walls is watching, waiting, and remembering.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
By the time the Lemp Mansion entered the late 20th and early 21st centuries, its reputation had already been firmly established. It was no longer just a historic family home. It was one of the most famous alleged haunted locations in America. As we already covered here, today the mansion operates as a restaurant and inn in St. Louis, Missouri, welcoming guests from all over the country. Some come for the history, some for the atmosphere, and others come for something they hope they might experience and cannot explain. Because despite renovations, preservation efforts, and modern use, the stories have never stopped. Over the years, the Lemp Mansion has been investigated by numerous paranormal teams, independent researchers, and television crews. While results vary with every ghost investigation, certain claims appear repeatedly across different investigations. EVPs capturing faint and unexplained whispers, sudden temperature drops in specific rooms without environmental cause, unexplained knocking sounds responding to investigators' questions, motion sensors triggering in empty hallways, audio recordings picking up what sound like faint voices or distant crying. Some investigators report feeling intense emotional shifts inside the mansion, particularly in areas tied to the Lemp family's private living quarters. Others report nothing unusual at all, and that divide is what keeps the legend alive. The most frequently reported haunting activity. Here we go. Shadow figures, phantom footsteps, unexplained voices, the feeling of being watched, object movement. Now, while none of these experiences are universally verified under controlled conditions, the consistency of similar reports across decades is what keeps interest in the mansion strong. Now, not everyone agrees that the Lemp Mansion is haunted. Skeptical explanations point to several possible factors: the psychological impact of knowing the mansion's tragic history, environmental factors such as old building acoustics, settling wood and airflow, light and shadow distortions in large Victorian structures, suggestion bias from decades of storytelling and media coverage, and emotional priming during ghost tours and overnight stays. Now, from this perspective, the mansion is not haunted by spirits, but by its own story. A story so powerful that it influences people. Still, skeptics also acknowledge something important. Even if the experiences have natural explanations, the consistency of reports across generations makes the Lemp Mansion culturally significant in the study of haunted locations. Also, really quick here before I move on to my next side, I apologize for all the little mess ups here, guys. I'm trying like absolute you-know-what to try to get 3 episodes recorded for you guys because I'm going on a trip and I will not be able to record. I was sick last week, so I was only able to put out 1 episode. So I'm just in a little bit of a time constraint, but I want to put episodes out for you guys. Moving on, whether or not anything supernatural remains inside the mansion, one fact is undeniable. The Lemp family history is marked by profound tragedy. 4 deaths, a collapsed empire, a mansion filled with grief that never fully left public memory. Places like the Lemp Mansion often become what researchers call memory sites, locations where historical emotion becomes inseparable from physical space in the public imagination. In other words, even if nothing paranormal is happening, people feel like something is there, and that feeling becomes part of the story. Standing outside the Lemp Mansion today, it's easy to see it as just another historical building in St. Louis. But once you know the history, it becomes something else entirely. A place where ambition built an empire, where loss shattered a family, where silence replaced celebration, and where stories of the unexplained continue to echo through the present day. So the question remains, did the Lemp Mansion become haunted because of tragedy? Or did tragedy simply make people more aware of what was already there? Either way, the mansion still stands, and those who step inside often leave with the same feeling, that they were not alone. Thank you for listening to this episode of Haunted America. If you enjoyed tonight's story, follow us on Facebook for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and upcoming episode drops. And don't forget, we're launching a new series soon, guys. 50 States of Fear. We're traveling across the country to uncover the most haunted locations in every state in America. And we want to include your stories. Email us your haunted locations, personal encounters, and unexplained experiences. Your story could be featured in a future episode. Our email is hauntedamericapodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some places never forget.
This episode is brought to you by Google Health. Stop chasing someone else's definition of health. What matters is what's healthy for you. Google Health offers a new kind of coach built with Gemini for effortless tracking, sleep insights, and holistic coaching tailored to you. Visit googlestore.com to learn more and start a new relationship with your health. Requires Google account, Google Health app, internet, and Google Health premium subscription. Features subject to change. Availability and results vary. Not intended for medical purposes. Works independently of Gemini apps. Check responses for accuracy.
A burst pipe, a dead water heater, the AC calling it quits. Who do you call? HomeServe is an easy way to handle unexpected home repairs with plans covering stuff basic homeowners insurance usually won't. Instead of scrambling for a contractor, you make one call to get the repair process started. Join the millions of customers who trust HomeServe right now. Go to homeserve.com/podcast for 50% less your first year. That's homeserve.com/podcast. Savings compared to renewal price void in Florida.